Hi, David Mould here. Thank you for tuning in to part 3 of our series, Donald Trump and the Great Controversy. This, of course, is part 3. We're going to be, and it's really, I don't know if one can really exhaust this theme. There's so much going on here in the United States at the moment, so much potential for tragedy, that I think we need to stay with the reasons why we've come up with an ad and submitted it to the 3 major newspapers of this country. All right? But before I get into it, I want to turn to the Word of God. I'd like to go to the discourse that Jesus is having with his disciples on the Mount of Olives. You find it in Matthew 24, you'll find it in Mark and Luke also. I'm going to turn to Mark chapter 13, verse 33. There's a little verse here, and it's expanded in Luke, but let's start with Mark. He says, Jesus speaking, he says, "Take heed, watch and pray, for you know not when the hour is." Okay? Watch and pray. That's our duty. It's found in Luke, but it's expanded upon by Dr. Luke. The Word of God in Luke 21:36 says, "Watch ye therefore," that's Jesus speaking, "and pray always, that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man." Here you have the element of watching with the intent of escaping. Jesus says, if you be found worthy to escape. And he has just given them a list of things that are to come before he returns, the fine print of which is found in the book of Revelation. He is painted with fairly broad strokes in the Gospels, but in the book of Revelation you really get down to the nitty-gritty. And for that reason I'm going to take you to Revelation 13, where he speaks about the beast and his image. We're going to turn to Revelation 13, verse 11. Verse 11 says, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon." In that one verse, based on keys of prophecy which I really can't go into now, I'm assuming that at least some of you watching this are familiar with Daniel, where Daniel explains that the symbol of beasts is a reference to kingdoms or kings. So Revelation 13 is speaking about a particular kingdom which would start off as a lamb and end up speaking as a dragon. The timing of the rise of this kingdom is significant because it is right after the first kingdom mentioned here, which we believe to be the papacy or the Roman Catholic Church, has received its deadly wound, which really started in the time of the Reformation with Luther and widened under Napoleon, when Napoleon in 1798 sent his general Berthier into the Vatican and took the Pope prisoner. That's the deadly wound that we speak about, that the Vatican received. For the first time, as far as I know, a Pope actually captured and deposed and put out of office. Exactly 1260 years after Justinian's decree authorizing the Roman Catholic Church to be the state church of the Roman Empire took effect in AD 538. Exactly 1260 years, just as the Bible predicted. But I don't want to focus on that so much as the transformation of the United States, the lamb-like beast, evolving into this beast which would speak as a dragon. The dragon that preceded him, the Vatican. When the Vatican speaks, entire nations would tremble. Okay? And we're told that this is what is coming before the second coming of Jesus Christ. And it's one of the reasons why I believe it is important for us to focus on Mr. Trump, because his statement about giving more power to the church, to the uninitiated, listening to that, it might mean nothing. To those of us who know prophecy and understand prophecy, that's a very ominous statement. Giving the church more power to do what? Having used these 3 verses, I'd like now to turn to something Mrs. White said and her description of what is coming. Just one paragraph. This is taken from the book Prophets and Kings, page 626. Christians should be preparing for what is soon to break upon the world as an overwhelming surprise. And this preparation they should make by diligently studying the Word of God and striving to conform their lives to its precepts. What I'm drawing attention to this morning is the fact that even Mrs. White describes it, not the second coming of Jesus Christ, but the events leading up to it, the prophecies that have to be fulfilled. She says when they are fulfilled, they will come as an overwhelming surprise. This lamb will speak as a dragon. She said the final movements will be rapid ones. Now, I'm not saying here that Mr. Trump is necessarily the fulfillment of anything, because I'm not God and I don't know. But what I am saying is that we shouldn't take him lightly. We shouldn't take any politician lightly who promises the church power. This country went to great pains to put into its constitution, to put into its vast body of laws. Well, really, the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. They had the lessons of history behind them. They knew what was the Roman Catholic Church, a mixture of church and state. And whenever you gave the church power, blood inevitably flowed. The framers knew that. The Constitution was, it had been approved in Washington, approved in Philadelphia, but the various states refused to ratify it until this declaration was made, that Congress shall make no law. This is a Bill of Rights for the people. No laws about religion, any at all. And what the Seventh-day Adventist Church has said is, yes, that will last for a while, but in the end, laws will be passed mandating how you worship and who you worship. All right? So we're not saying Mr. Trump is fulfilling it, but I am cautious. I am wary of him. And it's for that reason that we designed the ad that I showed you, this one here, and submitted it. I'll tell you more about that. It's for that reason why we quoted Justice Ginsburg, where she said that if Mr. Trump wins, she's heading for New Zealand. And there are others I'd like to quote today. The reason why we're putting so much effort into this is because I do believe the signs are ominous. And while I may not be God, and I don't know if Mr. Trump fits the bill, to my mind, he certainly has the temperament to drive this country in a direction where it will speak as a dragon. You hear him speaking as a dragon all by himself, but it is the nation. The nation will speak. And Mrs. White has gone on to explain in great controversy that the speaking of the nation is the action of its legislative and judicial authorities. Congress, the office of the president, and the court system. That the three combined will end up speaking as a dragon. So that's pretty much a preamble for today's program. I'd like to quote something. Yesterday, Mr. Trump visited Mexico and met with the Mexican president, and I did a little digging and found out that that president and two presidents who preceded him, Fox and Calderon, all have likened Mr. Trump to Adolf Hitler. And I'll confess something to you. I know I'm going to get myself in trouble. But as I listened to Mr. Trump, I couldn't help but think about this book that I have felt is one of the most important books on this planet. It's the book written by a Roman Catholic professor, John Cornwell. It's entitled Hitler's Pope. And in it, he chronicles step for step the moves made by the Vatican in bringing Adolf Hitler to power. Eugenio Pacelli, who was the Secretary of State before becoming the Pope, almost single-handedly brought Adolf Hitler to power. He disbanded the German party, the party that would have stood in the way of Hitler. He overruled his own bishops to get Hitler in power. And the information in this book is actually taken largely from the Vatican archives. Let me say it again for those of you who might be hearing this for the first time. Professor Cornwell applied to the Vatican for access to its archives about Pope Pius XII because he was offended at a dinner party when he heard Pius being blamed for much of the atrocities of World War II. He wanted to write a book exonerating the Pope, and instead he said he had barely begun his research when it was obvious that the information that the Vatican had turned over to him provided the basis for a wider indictment. Not an exoneration, but an indictment. And I couldn't help but think of this book the more I heard Mr. Trump speak. You know, his statements about making America great again echoed Hitler and the whole scenario of a people angry enough to do some pretty radical things. I'm sorry, that's who he reminded me of. Now, this is just my opinion. And in stating what I'm stating today, I'm likely to lose everybody watching because some of what I may say may end up offending Republicans. Some of what I may say may end up affecting Democrats. My concern isn't Republicans or Democrats. I'm concerned about religious liberty. And as I said in the last tape, the last video, had the statement been made by Mrs. Clinton, we would be focusing on her this morning. Okay? But the statement about giving the church more power came from the lips of Donald Trump. And that's why we're here. But here is what Enrique Peña Nieto had to say back in March, Monday, March 7th, 2016, about Mr. Trump. He said, there have been episodes in human history, unfortunately, where these expressions of this strident rhetoric have only led to very ominous situations in the history of humanity. That's how Mussolini got in. That's how Hitler got in. They took advantage of a situation, a problem perhaps, which humanity was going through at the time after an economic crisis. And I think what they put forward ended up at what we know today from history in global conflagration. He's obviously referring to World War II. We don't want that happening anywhere in the world. All right? That's Mr. Peña, President of Mexico. I've already stated how I think Mr. Trump could get in. He may be way behind in the polls, but if you watch the last video, I pointed to the possibility of a natural disaster. We know from having read The Spirit of Prophecy, having read Mrs. White's writings, there's a little dangling prophecy out there where she said God wasn't finished with San Francisco and Oakland. She said she felt sure that these two would be visited by the judgments of God. And I'm just simply putting two and two together. If there is a possibility of anything even remotely like what happened to Port Royal in Jamaica happening to San Francisco, where the city sinks, or a large portion of it sinks, and the only way to get to it is to send divers down, which is what you have to do today to get to see the old Port Royal. Most of it is still underwater, okay? And I'm simply saying if something like that should happen, it would certainly touch the panic button in this country and give the clergy an opportunity of saying, see, this country has gone, you know, in espousing homosexuality or in tolerating homosexuality to the extent that we have, we're offending God. We need to come back to God. And in that setting, I can see religious laws being passed. I can see what Revelation 13 predicted happening if there is this wave of panic running across the United States. But I felt it was necessary to just highlight what the Mexican president said. Well, what are we going to do today? There are 5 items on our agenda. Today, I would like to tell you, number one, what's happening to our ad. Where have we gone with it? We've also, there's a mission report. I recently went to Jamaica, West Indies, went on the mission field, heard gunshots, the likes of which I'd never heard before in Denham Town. And I've heard shots before. I'll tell you a little bit more about it. One person got killed the day before I came, 2 shortly after I left. I was only there for 5 days. But I listened. You would have thought, I suppose, I was never in Vietnam, so I can't tell you what Vietnam sounded like. But I listened to at least a half an hour of shooting back and forth, back and forth. And some sounded like automatic weapons to me. So I don't know what was going on in Denhamtown. I don't know who's funneling the guns. But something is happening, and that country is being prepared for something. All right? When people who can't even sign their own names, don't have a decent education, and yet can get their hands on guns so easily, that tells you that there is a power outside of Denhamtown that is evidently smuggling guns into the country that is intent on something. All right? I don't think it's just a matter of petty crime. I think people are being armed for some future conflict. Okay? That's just me. Third, I want to talk to you about the photographs for the New Illustrated Great Controversy. Fourth, I'd like to talk to you about some emails we got. And fifth, Ellen White's dream about San Francisco. In the previous videos 1 and 2, we mentioned statements she made after the earthquake of 1906. But I want to talk to you about a dream she had about San Francisco shortly before, 2 days before that earthquake. No, she didn't say it was San Francisco, I should add. But her description of the event, coupled with the timing of the earthquake in 1906, has led many to believe, including me, what she actually saw was what took place 2 days later in San Francisco. All right? So let's go to number 1. What is happening to this ad? What have we done with it? Where have we gone with it? Well, I can tell you yesterday, after probably a month of procrastination, I wanted to watch the pledges to see if anybody would pledge any serious money. It hasn't happened. But in spite of it, we still approached the top 3 newspapers in the country, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and the New York Times, with the purpose of purchasing ad space for a full-page ad. Now, let me remind you that the price for the Wall Street Journal is $359,000 and some change. The USA Today is $199,000, and the New York Times $159,000 and some change. And there I was on the phone yesterday, and I felt prodded to do it because I hadn't done nothing other than speak about it and making our videos. And I felt, and I hope it was the Lord, like I said, I don't hear voices, but I felt, David, you haven't done all you can. You can contact these newspapers and see if they will accept the ad. Then you will have done everything you can. You've spoken about it, you've made the video, but you need to go one step further, remembering that God responds to faith. Hebrews 11:6 tells us, but without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. We recall the story of the priests crossing the Jordan. It wasn't until their feet were placed in the water that the waters separated before them. They had to move on in faith. And so I felt that it was my duty yesterday, rather than waiting on funds to fall upon us, to call these 3 newspapers, even though we had nothing, and to approach them with the aim in view of purchasing advertising space in their papers. And so we have done it. We've approached them. Now it's the waiting time. I can tell you this, with the ads that our ministry prepares, because they involve long copy, inevitably they're going to be scrutinized by lawyers. Now, I should tell you, before I even talk about the legal scrutiny, I should tell you that one of the reasons that I made the move that I did yesterday is because of this statement, which I'd like to read to you from the Desire of Ages, page 668. The Lord is disappointed. I don't want to disappoint Jesus. I've disappointed him enough. I don't want to disappoint him by a lack of faith. The Lord is disappointed when his people place a low estimate upon themselves. He desires his chosen heritage to value themselves according to the price he has placed upon them. God wanted them else he would not have sent his Son on such an expensive errand to redeem them. He has a use for them, and he is well pleased when they make the very highest demands upon him, that they may glorify his name. This ad is to glorify the name of God. That's what this ad is all about. To point out to people that God has a gift called prophecy and that he has bequeathed it to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We know what is coming. Others may guess. We know. We know and can prove from the Bible that America is in the Bible, and that the speaking, the transformation from the lamb to the dragon involves the repudiation of its constitution and the putting in place of worship which will be sanctioned by the government. And if you do not comply, that civil penalties will be inflicted upon you at first, but then it will be a death decree in the end. We know this as the mark of the beast, the mark of authority of the Roman Catholic Church, which they boast is Sunday keeping. They boast that they introduced it to the church, that they changed the law instructed by Jesus. We'll get to that another time. All right? And, that's why we put it together, to draw attention not only to the gift of prophecy, but to the 10 commandments of God by which we all will be judged. As James said in James 2:12, so speak ye, and so do, as they that shall be judged by the law of liberty. All right? Going back to the quote, they, meaning God's people, may expect large things if they have faith in his promises. Desire of Ages, 668. We may expect large things if we have faith in the promises of God. I need large things. What to me is large? The Wall Street Journal, 359,000, I think, or 358. I've forgotten the amount, but that's large for us because we don't have the first penny. USA Today, $200,000. That's large because we don't have the first penny. The Los Angeles Times, 159,000. That's large. But the promise from the Desire of the Ages is we may expect large things if we have faith in the promises of God. I'm sorry, let me correct myself. The Wall Street Journal is $354,823.27. Okay? But having said that, let's move on. What are we doing with our ad? Almost all our ads have had to go before legal committees for approval. It was that way in 1990 when we came out with our Time magazine ad. Not only did it go before lawyers for approval, they actually contacted me and said they needed a copy of The Great Controversy. That, of course, was the book that we were advertising. It is the book we're advertising today in this ad, Great Controversy. Not that I have any copies of the book for sale, but I don't care where people get them. We're urging them to get those books. And as I said earlier, I wish we could mount such a campaign that people would demand that book from Ted Wilson and the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But that's another story. All right? We had to have legal approval, and we got it. We got it from Time magazine in 1990 when we submitted our 6-page ad. And we got it most recently from the Jamaica Gleaner when we ran a full-page ad without a lot of text. But it was a picture of the Pope in Congress, and it simply said, he came, he saw, he conquered. This one is different, and this is not just a headline and a photograph. This one has text. I've resorted to long copy, doing what David Ogilvy did, and depending upon my pen to sell the product, The Great Controversy. Okay? He used his pen, long copy, to sell Mercedes-Benzes when Mercedes-Benzes were doing nothing. It was David Ogilvy and his pen that marketed millions of Mercedes-Benzes, and since, maybe hundreds of millions since. Okay? And he also used his pen, long copy, to draw investors to Puerto Rico, where they invested billions of dollars. I remember flying into San Juan maybe 20, 30 years ago, and I couldn't believe the place. It almost looked like a small New York, the skyscraper. Well, maybe not quite that much. It sort of reminded me of Hong Kong. Hong Kong was bigger, much taller buildings and so forth. But it certainly didn't look like a Caribbean island, but it is. And it was the investment of David Ogilvy that David Ogilvy was able to stimulate in the island through his advertising campaigns on behalf of Puerto Rico. Yes, the pen is mightier than the sword. The only things that have not required legal approval of the ads we have created, I can think of animations. An animation we did of LaToya being shot, having her 2 eyes shot out in Kingston, Jamaica. And another one we did with the Pope coming to Congress. Those didn't require legal review. Now there are 2 that I'm working on. One is an animation of the lamb evolving into the dragon. We're preparing that one for you. It's not ready yet. In fact, the animator I want to use won't be ready for another month or so, but I've asked him to work on it for me. I'll tell you how we'll use it down the road. And there's another ad, but I'm not going to show you today because I'm really not satisfied with the way it looks. All right, so that's number 1. What have we done with the ad? We have submitted it. Maybe in the next week or 2, I'll be able to tell you, yes, the Wall Street Journal has approved it. USA Today has approved it. The New York Times has approved it. Then it will be a matter of, Lord, we've gone this far. We don't have the money, but we're prepared to come to you with fasting and prayer for the money. I won't go into too many stories here, but I know what it is to fast and pray and to get major results when I put certain things before the Lord. But I've told that story so many times, and I'll just leave it off for today. All right, our next item was the mission trip. Number 2, we finished number 1, what's happening to our ad. Number 2, I went to Jamaica last month, August. I spent 5 days after Nassau. I went there. Number 1, there was a friend of mine who was he was cremated actually, Richard Forbes from Phase 3 Productions. That's the company we have used since 1990. I think it was my friend Lukey Chong who introduced me to Phase 3 and Richard Forbes. And we've stayed with them ever since. The footage that we shot in Denham Town for the video The Road to Tivoli was all Phase 3. Now when I met Richard, he could see, but he became blind, and he still ran his company even though he was blind. Was involved in just about every phase of it. His wife and son now are the major players in that company. Mrs. Marcia Forbes, who at one point was she managing director or just manager for TVJ, Television Jamaica, and Delano, who is following in his father's footsteps. I had to attend that funeral. As long as I wasn't preaching someplace, I had to go because Phase 3 had been good to me. I had developed a decent relationship with Delano, Richard, and Marcia. Richard was being put to rest. There was never a time that I came to Jamaica and I visited him that Richard didn't say to me, "Pardy, offer a word of prayer for me now." And I would kneel down in his office beside him and pray, and just talk to the Lord. I confess to you, I prayed and asked the Lord to restore his sight, but evidently he chose not to. But Richard had a God-fearing side to him, and that's what I wanted to get across to the people at the reception, because I did get up, I did speak for a few minutes to draw their attention to the kind of person that he was. I might have had a little piece of the puzzle, and I wanted to share it.
This is an event I would not miss. I flew in from Florida on Friday. Funnily, I too called Pardy Richard. I met him around about 1990, Marcia, at the old Oceana Hotel. You videoed a meeting that we had there. It's funny, when I landed in Jamaica, the newspaper headline that day was "War in the Church." But Richard and Phase 3 did everything they could to capture the essence of that event, for which I'll be eternally grateful. And even though we're having a light occasion at the moment, I'd like to speak from the perspective of one who has just lost a son. 25 years old. 25 years old. Gone way too soon. Lots of laughter, but you really never know the heartache that's going on behind the scenes. I miss Richard already. I thank God I knew him. I thank God Delano. I remember the West Kingston, Denham Town, Tivoli Gardens, the video you put together for us called The Road to Tivoli, with over 250,000 views. Thank God for phase 3. I'll close with this. There was never a time that I came to phase 3 when Richard didn't ask, Paddy, say a prayer for me now. Never a time. There was a side of him that was quite God-fearing. The trouble is he was asking a sinner like himself to pray for him. But I did, and counted it an honor. If I might say to those of you gathered here, Delano, you have a little one. Don't let a day pass without expressing your love. And for your mother as well. I wish my son was here. He's gone. Too soon. Too soon. Thank you.
But moving on from Richard and phase 3, because as I said, all the footage that you've seen, everything from the road to Tivoli, all the shots we took in Denham Town, it was phase 3. Everything. And so I owed him a lot, and I wanted to be there for him, for Marcia, for his son, Delano. But that wasn't the only reason I was there. I did spend time in the mission field, and I can tell you this time was an experience and a half, because I heard a barrage of gunshots. It lasted for at least a half an hour, on and off. And these weren't police firing at gang members. These were gang members firing at themselves. This is what I found out later. The day before I landed, there had been violence on Chestnut Lane, which is where, by the way, 2 of our workers go giving Bible studies. Chestnut Lane is one of the major spots that they go to, giving Bible studies, or at least at this stage of the game. And there was a execution there. But the gunshots started. I was out on the road. I was talking to neighbors, and the shooting started. We heard it. But they can better judge than me how close the shots are. These sounded close, but not all that close. And I found out that they were right around the vicinity of Chestnut Lane again, working their way up. The person in whose home or who I was visiting, I was actually quite annoyed at me, basically saying, Brother Mole, don't you hear the gunshots? You know, the people in the community were angling towards their doors, because if the shots came any closer, they could easily bolt inside. But I was out on the sidewalk talking with people. They know me as pastor, and I'm not saying I had to put up any bravado. I mean, I duck when they duck. In fact, I take my cues from them. And they were standing around, albeit angling towards concrete, either the concrete fence or the concrete home. But when I did finally heed the warning and go inside, it was a short while after that the shots sounded as though they were like on the next block. And I heard automatic fire, the pam 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 pam, you know, and it was coming closer. So I'm glad I took that person's advice and stepped inside. I think everybody else that was on the road with me did at that stage of the game. But the fact of the matter is, I wasn't pushing my head out to see what was going on. I did see some things which I will not report here, lest it be misinterpreted. You know, I saw enough to know that this was real, and I certainly heard enough. But this is where our workers work. It's in this community that our workers not only give Bible studies on places like Chestnut Lane and Bread Lane and Regent Street and North Street. They also prepare soup once a week for the indigent, for those who might be aged or sick or so forth, and go door to door or spread out. Otherwise, just trying to be as Christ would in the communities where He alive. Okay? This is the sort of work that we do. I'm not there, but I do have workers who do the work while I'm not there. And I must say I'm grateful to God for those of you who occasionally send offerings in for the mission field. I wish there were more of it. What I'm saying is that our work isn't confined to the great controversy. I have to have a mission presence. That's just in me. But yes, this is the sort of thing that goes on. I'm grateful to God that those workers saw fit to take this week off. The gunshots were a bit disconcerting, and maybe it's best to just wait until things cool off in the community again before they go forth with the Word of God. As I said, one was killed the day before I showed up, and after that shooting, 2 more perished, and a third on Law Street. Just a very, very serious state of affairs. But as I've said, I'm concerned because many of the people who are, in fact, with the guns are people who are almost semi-literate, or where they're getting money for guns and bullets. Somebody big is funneling the guns into Jamaica and funneling the guns into these communities with an aim, I believe, of something serious down the road. Right now, the guns are in the hands of young men, and I believe that the whole nation is being prepared for something serious. All right? But I do know people who can't take it anymore, who live down there, who want to move. I can think of one mother and her children, and she was threatened they're going to burn down her house if they don't catch this son and that son, and if they don't catch that one, they're going to kill the other one. She's at her wit's end. She don't know what to do. We're trying to help people to get out, but I only have limited resources. I can't buy homes. I might be able to occasionally help with rent for a half a month or a month, but our ministry doesn't have that kind of money. But it's hard to just stand up and watch people suffer. The little bit that we try to do is basically, in addition to what the Bible workers do, we might help people with school fees, money for books, maybe some lunch money for the children as they go to school. And I do have 2 students in university whom we help sponsor. It's the least I can do. I know that if I were living in that community, it sure would be nice for somebody to come along and say, I'll help you with your tuition in university. But we can't do it for more than 2. I wish it was 200, but I can't. I just don't have the resources. I stretch them as far as the Lord allows me to stretch them. All right? For those who want to move, it's a pitiful thing. People who have grown up all their lives in Denham Town who simply say, I can't take the violence anymore. I can't take the shooting anymore. But that's where I was. There is one more trip that I'll have to make sometime after September. Jonathan had a friend who has told me she would like to go everywhere that Jonathan went on his last trip. That is going to mean, well, not just on his last trip, but wherever, in particular on his last trip. But Jonathan helped fix a home in Tivoli Gardens. He's familiar with Carnation Market, which is where much of the shooting is in that vicinity. He climbed the falls on his last day in Jamaica. I didn't climb with him. He and a friend climbed. He took over 80 photographs there, climbing Duns River Falls. So the photographs aren't of him, they're of her and the time that they had together. So I'll be going down, and I understand one of his brothers wants to come now, and other of his friends, so I'll be a grand tour guide for a few days, taking them. I guess this young lady wants some closure. She wants to go wherever Jonathan was. She wants to be there. She wants to experience what he experienced, and I have promised them I will do that. All of this, the life of a missionary. I never thought that it would involve all of this. I'm going to take it to another side of Jamaica. I'm going to get out of the inner city and the shooting and the violence and the murders and the cussing and the bloodshed and the drugs and so forth. I'm going to take you out into the country. Years ago, I was approached by a lady who asked me for a Bible. This was when we had our telecast in 2000, 2001. And I provided her with a Bible, drove out there, met her, and we become friends. And so very often when I'm in Jamaica, I will drive out there to see how they're doing. And this time that we were there, the country folk, they like to show their hospitality with things that are grown on their properties or their yards. In this instance, there was a breadfruit tree, And I'm about to show you shots of an 86-year-old man climbing a breadfruit tree with that sack over his shoulder to catch the breadfruits and to bring back to us. Well, I can recall standing there as breadfruit after breadfruit came tumbling to the ground. And of course, I was nervous there looking up, hoping and praying he didn't come tumbling to the ground, because I know his granddaughter was a bit scared. She said, "Brother Mole, we can't stop Papa. Papa just climbs. He climbs. He thinks he's still in his 20s or 30s, 86 years old, climbing that breadfruit tree just to say thank you, to show hospitality to us who had come to visit them." You know, I'll show you some shots also of the landscape. It's not just sea and beaches and white sand. We have our hills and our valleys and our agriculture also. But that's what I did in Jamaica. But perhaps the most telling was an appeal that I made. I'm going to read it to you. This thing about Donald Trump is not, the Trump phenomenon is not something that is just being watched exclusively in the United States. There are world leaders watching Donald Trump and wondering what change he portends for the nation. And in Jamaica, they're watching him. I recall being on a telecast. I've been the guest of Ian Boyne on Religious Hard Talk 3 times. Twice we spoke about what's coming to America, the Adventist position that the country is going to repudiate its constitution and become a quasi-theocracy. And twice he poo-pooed the idea. But as Mr. Trump has promised the church more power if he's elected, I have felt the time has come to resurrect what Ian Boyne laughed at and scoffed at. And so I approached TVJ, Television Jamaica, with the offer of purchasing primetime. I'd like 90 minutes of primetime to show a special on Jamaica about what we Seventh-day Adventists believe is coming to the United States and what could be coming as rapidly as January if that gentleman ever takes office. But this is what I said. I'll read it for you. I wrote the television station word for word. This is it. You're reading my email. 3 times now I've had the privilege of being the guest of Mr. Ian Boyne on Religious Hard Talk. The last time maybe 3 or 4 years ago. On 2 of them, he resoundingly ridiculed the idea of America evolving into a quasi-theocracy. With Bible prophecy on our side, I was content to wait. Now, however, with Mr. Trump on the horizon promising more power to the church if he's elected, I think it is highly appropriate that this subject be revisited. I would be happy to purchase time to discuss this and to present the reasons why I and many beside me are quite apprehensive about the ramifications of a possible Trump presidency. Ideally, we would like to purchase this telecast a few weeks before the U.S. presidential election. It would be a totally independent production, neither underwritten by nor undertaken in conjunction with any church. What are the chances of this becoming a reality? I would appreciate your timely response. This was submitted last week. We're giving them a week or 2 to chew on it before I call back to find out if it is being met with approval. Because if it is, that means I'm going to have to do a telecast, purchase the time, which I hope we can get for maybe $5,000 or less. It all depends. If it's midweek, we're going to have to pay more. If it's a Sunday night, I'm assuming that we can get it for $5,000 or less. But with proper advertising, we should be able to draw a healthy audience to listen to the Seventh-day Adventist position of what is coming upon the United States. Right? Well, I think I'm going to stop here because I'm running out of time. And we're barely into page 5 of a script that's quite a bit longer than that. I think you get the picture that we're not just about the great controversy. We're not just about running an ad or pushing the book, even though that's my passion. We also have a heart for the mission field, a love for people, a love for the world, with a special emphasis on my homeland, Jamaica. I'm going to pause here and simply say that for those of you who like what you've seen thus far and you want to support us or continue supporting us, I'll put the I'll put the information on your screen so that you can see. I'd welcome people who'd make a monthly commitment to us. It's sort of awkward going month by month not knowing what we can expect. But if you like what you've heard, we'll pick it up next week with Donald Trump and the Great Controversy Part 4. Okay? But there's the information, and as I'm fond of saying, he who hath ears to hear, let him hear. Amen.